Atlantis was a paradise blessed by the gods, until its people defied the one who created it. In a single moment of fury, Poseidon unleashed a flood that turned a shining empire into a memory beneath the waves. There are truths buried so deep beneath the ocean that even the waves have forgotten their names. Truths swallowed by blue silence, wrapped in the weight of ages, softened by darkness, but never erased. And among all the secrets the sea has claimed, none is spoken of more quietly, more reverently, than the rise and fall of Atlantis. Not as a fable of greed, nor as a warning carved into the bones of history, but as a tragedy woven from love, ambition, and the sorrow of a god who watched a dream slip from his hands. For this story does not truly begin with the sinking of a city. It begins with longing. Long before Atlantis shone like a star above the waves, before its marble towers scraped the sky and its harbors thrummed with 1,000 sails, there was an island untouched by glory. A modest place of swaying grasses and rugged cliffs, where the wind hummed through heather and the sea whispered along stone. Few people lived there: shepherds, fishermen, families whose hands were rough from work and whose lives were simple. And among them was Clyto. She walked the island as though she belonged to it more deeply than the roots of any tree. With bare feet dusted in soil, hair braided loosely down her back, and a quiet strength in her eyes, she lived without fear of the storms that battered the cliffs or the waves that roared below. She sang to the sea sometimes, not to call it, but to keep it company. Songs without words, shaped by tenderness rather than need. Poseidon heard them. He heard them from the deep, where currents curl through endless halls and light sleeps on beds of sand. He felt her voice like a tremor across the ocean's surface, small but sincere, soft but unwavering. It was not a prayer mortals prayed for favors. It was not a plea mortals begged in moments of fear. It was a melody asking nothing, offering everything. It awakened something in him he had long forgotten: curiosity. So he rose, not in a roar of water or a blaze of divine light, but as a man walking from the sea at dusk, salt dripping from his hair, eyes shimmering with distant storms. Clyto was gathering herbs when she saw him. She did not know who he was, but she felt the weight of his presence, the way the air stilled around him, the way the waves seemed to pause in greeting. "You came from the water," she said calmly, not stepping back. Poseidon smiled softly. "And you speak to it as though it listens." "Does it?" Tonight, it did. Their meeting was not a collision of worlds but a quiet merging, like two currents finding each other miles offshore. In the days that followed, Poseidon returned again and again, each time in human form, each time shedding a little more of his distance, allowing himself to exist not as a god of storms, but as a man sitting beside a mortal woman who looked at him without fear. He brought her shells that glowed in moonlight. She brought him laughter that warmed even the coldest tide. He offered her stories of the deep. She offered him silence that felt like home. Love grew in the gentle way moss covers stone, naturally, inevitably, without announcement. And from that love came Atlantis. Poseidon shaped the island in Clyto's image, not grand, not opulent, but balanced. Rings of land and water intertwined like woven threads. Canals curved through gardens. Bridges arched like the backs of sleeping whales. Springs bubbled sweetly. Birds nested in temple eaves. Everything lived in harmony, as though the land breathed with quiet gratitude. Clyto lived to see her children grow, sons with their father's strength and their mother's kindness. They tended fields. They learned the tides. They cared for their people and each other. The early Atlanteans were peaceful, humble, gentle-hearted. They treated their island not as a possession, but as a blessing. But time does what it always does. It stretches. It thins memories. It buries truths. Clyto passed into the song of the world, leaving Poseidon with children who ruled wisely until they didn't. For it was not malice that changed Atlantis. It was wonder. The kind of wonder that, when left untempered, turns into hunger. For beauty begs to be expanded. Comfort begs to be surpassed. Knowledge begs to be pushed. Generations passed. The canals grew wider. The gardens more elaborate. The temples larger, gleaming with imported stone. Ships brought wealth. Wealth brought ambition. Ambition brought forgetting. The Atlanteans did not turn cruel overnight. Not even over decades. But slowly, little by little, the balance shifted. They built towers to reach the clouds. They carved tunnels beneath the earth. They engineered machines that bent tides. They shaped the sea not with reverence, but with command. Poseidon watched from afar. He hoped they would correct themselves, rediscover the quiet wisdom their ancestors lived by, return to harmony. But instead, they celebrated their victories. Their armies grew. Their pride swelled. Their eyes lifted not to the sky in gratitude, but in conquest. And the gods whispered among themselves. Athena frowned at their arrogance. Zeus watched with cold curiosity. Hera sighed, knowing too well how quickly pride eats kingdoms. Even Apollo, whose temples they honored, warned them through dreams. But Atlantis did not listen. The ocean warned them too. Storms came heavier. Tides shifted unpredictably. Waves tasted bitter with omen. And still, the Atlanteans pressed onward. Poseidon descended at last, not in fury, but in hope, and walked Atlantis as a mortal man. He found markets overflowing with gold wrested from conquered lands. He found the harbor crowded with ships meant not for exploration, but domination. He found slaves chained beneath marble arches. He did not shout. He asked. "Remember why you were blessed," he said. "Remember the sea does not belong to you." The kings, the descendants of his own line, smiled at him the way a student smiles at an old teacher they believe they have surpassed. "We have grown beyond your protection," the eldest said. "We command the sea now. Your reign as master of the waters is symbolic, nothing more." The words pierced Poseidon more deeply than any spear, not because they defied him, but because they had abandoned Clyto's heart. He left Atlantis that day with a heaviness that curled through the ocean like a darkening tide. He returned to the depths and spoke with beings older than the gods, currents of ancient memory, sleeping storms, mountains beneath the waves. All agreed, the balance was broken, and balance, once broken, must be restored. He gave Atlantis one final night, a final sunset, a final chance to remember. They celebrated instead, and Poseidon closed his eyes. The sea inhaled. The ocean floor trembled. The first cracks spread beneath the palace. The canals overflowed. The sky dimmed, soft as drifting ash. Yet even then, Poseidon hesitated, torn between justice and grief, torn between the weight of a god's duty and the lingering echo of Clyto's love. He whispered her name. The sea answered. What followed was not a rage-filled destruction, but a solemn, unstoppable reclamation. The tide rose not as a weapon, but as a verdict. The walls of Atlantis shuddered. Towers bent. Streets rippled. The great wave rose like a curtain drawn across the horizon, and descending with it came not fury, but sorrow. Poseidon stood atop the wave, silent, grief-stricken, resolute. His eyes were the color of storms held back for centuries. His trident glowed faintly, like a lighthouse mourning its own shipwreck. He did not roar. He did not command. He simply let the sea return what had been borrowed. And Atlantis sank. Softly at first, then all at once, swallowed by the world that once nurtured it. Screams faded into the bubbling silence. Lights drowned beneath foam. Marble dissolved into sand, memories scattered like shells along the seabed. When it was done, the sea lay calm as glass. Poseidon remained, shoulders heavy, gaze lost to the depths. He had fulfilled his duty, but duty's cost. He whispered again. Clyto, forgive them. The ocean stirred, not in answer, but in sympathy. For gods do not weep, but the sea can. And that night, the tides carried salt not only from the deep, but from sorrow. The night after Atlantis fell was quieter than any the sea had known in an age. Not the peaceful quiet of distant shores or gentle tides, but a heavy, suspended quiet, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. The moon hung low, pale and uncertain, its reflection trembling on waters still recovering from the weight of what had passed. Far beneath that trembling surface, Atlantis rested. Not shattered. Not broken. Simply stilled. Its towers, once gleaming in sunlight, now leaned like weary giants settling into sleep. The city's rings of land and water lay ghostly pale in the filtered moonlight that traveled down through miles of sea. Fish wove their silver bodies through arches that once echoed with footsteps. Algae drifted like forgotten curtains along marble columns. Silence curled through every corridor, but death had not fully claimed the place. Not yet, for the souls of Atlantis had not vanished when their city sank. Mortals are fragile, yes, but their spirits, especially when bound to a place of great love or great sorrow, linger like sea foam after a wave recedes. And so, As the waters embraced the fallen kingdom, faint shapes, glimmers, outlines, shimmers of presence began to drift through the submerged streets. They were not fully formed, nor fully gone. They were memories wearing the shape of people, echoes moving through currents. Most wandered aimlessly, confused. Some clung to doorways that no longer opened. Others sat silently where their homes once stood. A few called out names that dissolved in the water. And among them were the kings, the sons of Poseidon, now stripped of their crowns, their pride, their delusions. They drifted like shadows, unable to comprehend how quickly a legacy can collapse when its roots grow in arrogance rather than humility. Poseidon saw them, from a distance, for he remained in the deep, unseen but present, watching the pieces of his dream settle into their new reality. His form was dimmed now, his trident lowered, his shoulders curved as though bearing a weight no tide could lift. He did not speak. He did not command the waters. He only watched, silent as a stone beneath the waves. He felt no triumph, only ache. His thoughts circled back to Cleito, her soft voice, her gentle understanding, her ability to see goodness in places others dismissed. He wondered what she would say if she could see what Atlantis had become. He wondered if she would blame him. He wondered if she would understand that even gods can misjudge the future. But the sea stirred beside him. A shape, fluid, shimmering, older than any mortal memory, approached. It was not a creature. Not a god. Not a spirit of storm or tide. It was one of the primordial currents, ancient forces that existed before even the Olympians drew their first breath. It moved like water flowing upward, downward, and sideways at once, forming a vague face only when Poseidon looked directly at it. "You bear sorrow," the current murmured, its voice a pressure rather than a sound. Poseidon nodded. "I loved them," he said quietly. "I wanted them to remember what love shaped their world. But they forgot." "All things forget," the current replied. "Even you have forgotten your own beginnings." Poseidon did not deny it. "You guided them," the current continued, "but guidance is not control. Mortals grow in the direction their hearts choose, not the direction you intend." "They grew into pride," Poseidon whispered. "Into arrogance. Into the belief that they were more than the sea that sheltered them." The current circled him slowly, like a ribbon of living water. "And now they float between worlds. Their fate is not yours alone to carry." Poseidon looked toward the city, now glowing faintly as moonlight filtered through ruined rooftops. "What will become of them?" he asked. "That depends," the current said, "on what they become next." As Poseidon watched, something strange began to unfold in the ruins below. The spirits, drifting uncertainly, slowly began to gravitate toward one place, the central shrine where Cleito once lit lamps in the earliest days of Atlantis. The structure had crumbled, but its foundation remained, stone arranged in a simple circle, not for kings or priests, but for a woman who had once been the heart of a humble place. The spirits gathered, at first in silence, then in recognition, then in something like remembrance. It began with a soft glow, an almost imperceptible shimmer rising from the shrine floor. Then another. Then more. Each glowing thread connected to a drifting soul, drawing them gently downward until they stood, no longer lost shapes, but formed, human-like again. Not living, not dead, something between. Poseidon felt his breath hitch. "Is this?" he began. "Yes," the current whispered. "Atlantis remembers its true mother." The glow intensified, threads weaving through the water, braiding into a soft, pulsing light that illuminated the entire city. And as the light grew, the spirits changed. Their confusion eased. Their edges sharpened. Their forms steadied. Each found a clarity they had not felt in years, not in life, not in their final moments. They no longer looked like frightened echoes. They looked peaceful, like they finally understood that Atlantis was not lost. It had simply transformed. A city of the sea now. A city of memory. A city returning to the element from which it was born. Poseidon felt a warmth rise in him, a warmth he had not felt since the early days beside Cleito. It was faint, bittersweet, but unmistakably real. "You see," the current murmured. "What falls is not always destroyed. What sinks is not always lost. The sea does not erase, it preserves." Poseidon closed his eyes. "And what of me?" he asked softly. "What must I become now?" The current drifted closer, its voice like gentle pressure against his chest. "You are the sea," it said. "You are change. You are memory. But even the sea must sometimes let go of what it loves." He bowed his head. Letting go is the hardest labor of gods. But the spirits below began to drift through their new home with purpose, repairing memories, weaving through broken streets, gathering in the temple's remains as though forming a new kind of community. They moved slowly, gracefully, like figures in a dream that had finally found its ending. And Poseidon understood. Atlantis had not died. It had simply come home. He watched for a long time, hours, days, perhaps longer. Time flowed strangely in the deep. Eventually, he turned away from the city and walked into the vastness of the ocean, letting the darkness fold around him. He had more realms to guard, more storms to shape, more shores to listen to, more civilizations to watch rise and fall. But a piece of him would remain here, always. And sometimes, when the moonlight touches the sea just right, the ruins of Atlantis shimmer in gold. Sailors hear echoes of distant singing, soft, melodic, almost like a lullaby carried through miles of water. They say it is the city dreaming. They say it is Poseidon grieving. They say it is the ocean remembering. But the truth is quieter still. In the deep, Atlantis lives. Far below the surface of the world, where sunlight no longer dared to wander and the weight of ages pressed softly against stone, Atlantis began to breathe again. Not with lungs, for the city no longer lived by mortal measures, but with memory. Memory became its pulse, the slow drifting of spirits became its heartbeat, the soft glow in its temples became the warmth of its rekindled soul. Time in the deep was not measured in days. It flowed like currents, circular, wandering, unhurried. And in that gentle drift, the spirits of Atlantis discovered something unexpected: peace. Not immediately. The first months, if months had any meaning down there, were filled with questions they could not voice, long pauses of thought, glimmers of sadness rising and dissolving like bubbles. But slowly, they came to understand. They were home. The ocean had not claimed them out of cruelty. The sea had called them back to the place they were meant to grow into. They walked the halls of their submerged world with quiet reverence, relearning its curves, its corners, its soft blooming of underwater life. Coral grew along the edges of old stairways. Schools of silver fish twirled through open colonnades like ribbons of light. And the spirits moved not with grief, but with a calm acceptance, as though they had entered a new chapter of existence, one with no hurry and no fear. Above them, Poseidon wandered the oceans as he always had. But his steps were heavier now, each footfall echoing through trenches and ridges with a resonance of regret. He passed volcanic ridges without noticing their fire. He brushed against leviathans who bowed in respect, and he barely felt their presence. For even though he knew Atlantis lived in a new form, even though he knew the spirits had found meaning, the weight of his choice stayed with him like a deep, slow ache in the center of his chest. Gods rarely doubt. Poseidon doubted. He doubted whether he had acted too late. He doubted whether he had failed to guide them early enough. He doubted whether the dream he had built with Cleito had ever truly belonged to him, or whether it had always been destined to slip beyond his grasp. But doubt is like a tide. It comes, it goes, and it carries with it the promise of change. One night, in the farthest part of the ocean, a place where ridges rose like sleeping colossi and the water glowed with faint blue fire, Poseidon paused. Something tugged at him. Not a voice, not a sound, but a familiar warmth, like a hand resting lightly on his shoulder. He followed it, through caverns lit by dripping luminescence, past the bones of ancient whales, beneath drifting clouds of tiny glowing creatures. At last, he reached a clearing in the deep, and there, for the first time since the fall, he saw them. Not all of Atlantis, just a few spirits, drifting gently above a flat outcrop of stone. Their forms glowed softly, shaped by moonlight they had not seen in centuries. And in the center of them stood one figure more defined than the others, radiant, poised, her presence unmistakable even in death. Cleito. The memory of her was so powerful that the sea itself pulsed around her. Her hair drifted like threads of morning fog. Her eyes glowed like the reflection of dawn on the tide. She was not alive, no, but she was not gone either. Her spirit, shaped by love and anchored by the oldest part of Atlantis, had remained strong enough to gather into a presence more real than most mortals ever become. Poseidon froze. He could command mountains to rise. He could calm a hurricane with a gesture, but he could not move toward her. Not yet. Clyto drifted toward him first. The spirits around her parted respectfully, bowing their luminous heads. She approached with the same steady steps she had once used on land, her gaze warm but shadowed by a gentle sadness. "You have carried this burden too long," she said softly. Her voice was not sound, it was vibration in the water, memory turned into a shape that Poseidon could feel against his heart. "I failed them," Poseidon whispered. "You loved them," Clyto replied. "I let them forget," he said. "You let them grow." Poseidon looked away, ashamed. "They grew in the wrong direction." Clyto shook her head slowly, her hair drifting like seaweed in a mild current. "No growth is straight," she said. "No people stay what they were born to be. Even gods change. Even oceans change." She reached toward him, her hand fading and returning in ripples of shimmering light. "You guided them as long as they would allow. When they stopped listening, the world had its path." Poseidon closed his eyes. Her presence washed over him like warmth after a long storm. "I loved them because they were yours," he murmured. "And they will always be," Clyto said. She gestured to the spirits behind her, the luminous shapes drifting peacefully in the quiet dark. "They are not lost," she said. "They are not broken. They are learning again, as all souls do when the world reshapes them." Poseidon looked at them, and for the first time since Atlantis fell, he did not feel the crushing weight of failure. The spirits moved gracefully, gathering in small groups, guiding sea life around their homes, tending coral gardens that glowed with soft violet light. They spoke to one another with gestures rather than words, their forms shimmering like lanterns beneath the sea. They had found a new rhythm, a rhythm no longer bound to conquest or pride, but to harmony with the very element that had reclaimed them. Clyto placed a hand over her own heart, a gesture she once used in life when trying to comfort him. "You built a kingdom," she said softly. "But what remains now is a community." Poseidon felt his throat tighten. "I miss you." Clyto's smile was as gentle as tidewater around bare feet. "I am here whenever the sea remembers me." "And when the sea forgets?" Poseidon asked. "The sea never forgets," she whispered. The waters around them pulsed gently, an ancient heartbeat, older than gods. Poseidon stepped closer, reaching toward her, but his hand passed through her light. She shimmered, dimmed, and then regained form. "You cannot hold me," she said softly. "Not anymore." He nodded slowly. "But I can watch over them." "You always have," she said. The spirits behind her glowed brighter, as though acknowledging his vow. Clyto drifted backward, her form growing softer, more diffuse, blending into the deep's quiet light. "Go, Poseidon," she said. "You have storms to guide, shores to protect, worlds to balance. We will be well." Her light faded slowly, gently, like a candle flame losing itself in morning. "I will return," Poseidon whispered. "You will," her voice replied. "And when I do," he said, "I hope to find Atlantis thriving." The last of her glow faded into the water. "And you will," her echo answered. Poseidon stood alone again, but not in sorrow. The ache remained, yes, but it was softened, steadied, transformed into purpose. He turned away from the place where Clyto had stood and faced the vast ocean once more. The deep stretched into darkness ahead of him, not empty, but full of potential, of life, of mysteries yet unrevealed. Slowly, calmly, he moved forward, his body dissolving into swirling currents, becoming one with the sea again. Above him, far above, the moon shone on gentle waves. Below him, Atlantis shimmered softly in the dark, a city no longer lost, but reborn. And the sea carried the memory of that rebirth to every shore.